One of the greatest things about fantasy is that it introduces us to brand new worlds. Worlds that likely hold some similarities to our own. They feel believable, yet fantastically unbelievable at the same time. Something really only the great fantasy writers are able to perfect. World building is the bread and butter of fantasy, and it's no easy task creating a living, breathing world. One that's filled with strange alien landscapes, vast kingdoms, intricate political systems, dangerous magics, and mythical creatures. Fantasy is the only genre that truly opens up the gates for human creativity to do wondrous things. And today I'll be going over 10 of the greatest fantasy worlds of literature ever created. How will I be choosing which ones end up in my top 10? This is just my personal preference, but I'm also going to be taking into account how influential each of these worlds are. Now there is one rule: none of the worlds on this list can take place on Earth. So that automatically cancels out the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, the world from the Percy Jackson books, the version of Chicago from the Dresden Files, any other series that takes place on Earth. The only exception to this rule is if it takes place in an almost unrecognizable version of Earth. Maybe it's ages and ages in the past before known history, or it's just another turning of the wheel. And of course, I want to hear what your top 10 worlds are as well, so let me know in the comments. Make sure to stick around to the end for some honorable mentions. At number 10, we have the magical land of Narnia. For decades, C.S. Lewis's sprawling adventures in his 7 Chronicles of Narnia books have enthralled readers both young and old. Narnia's got everything, from talking animals, like my favorite, Reepicheep, and other fantastical beasts, not to mention Turkish Delight and even Father Christmas himself. Magic and wonder flows everywhere in Narnia, and Lewis was clever in how he used biblical elements to inspire events within his world. In the books, we even see the creation of Narnia, the iconic lamppost, and the wardrobe, all within the magician's nephew, and then we get to experience the adventure all the way up to the last battle. I feel like reading the Chronicles of Narnia for the first time is one of those experiences in reading that just sticks with you. Everyone's gonna remember first meeting Aslan, or Puddleglum, and entering Cair Paravel and boarding the Dawn Treader. Personally, my family used to listen to the audiobooks during family road trips, so it's very nostalgic to me. Not to mention, I grew up watching the adaptations, and not just the movies, but also the BBC 1988 miniseries. Does anyone else remember that, or was that just a fever dream? What? I gotta agree with one of my subscribers in my recent community post. Narnia really doesn't get enough credit anymore. One thing I've always liked is how cryptic the map is. I used to actually have my favorite version of this map hung up between my shelves in my older videos from like 5 years ago. Anyway, it's a classic portal fantasy with a world that is filled with wonder. Next is the lush land of Austin Ard from Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. This is a series that's been enormously influential. It's gone on to inspire authors like George R.R. Martin, Christopher Paolini, and Patrick Rothfuss to write their own works. You can even find some of its influence in Skyrim and Dragon Age Origins, which I was super excited to find. This trilogy was a huge turning point in the genre that was deeply rooted in like the quest fantasy of the Lord of the Rings, but this broke new ground by adding in more political turmoil. Austin Ard is a complex world with over 100 cities, towns, and villages that are spread out over a vast continent, peopled by an array of cultures and races. It's a world that's almost as rich and complex as Middle-earth. This is truly a landmark epic fantasy. It deserves much more attention from modern readers. And here we follow Simon, a kitchen boy from the royal castle who's sent on a quest to offer the only hope of salvation and to uncover a deadly riddle concerning long-lost swords of power as the land itself around him begins to die. Next up is the continent. It's undeniable that in recent years, the Witcher franchise by Polish author Andrei Sapkowski, has steadily become a global phenomenon. Let me know in the comments if you've read the books, or played the games, or watched the Netflix adaptation, and which was your favorite. Now, the setting is a unique and varied medieval fantasy setting known simply as the Continent. Many of the various locales, characters, and monsters of Sapkowski's fictional world are based in part on Eastern European history and Slavic folklore, though you can pretty much find representation from several other mythologies like Celtic, Persian, Norse, and Greek. On the Continent, you can expect to find ancient Leshen, shape-shifting dragons, vampires, griffins, drowners, and plenty of other monsters. And of course, the mutated monster slayers known as the Witchers. It's a world of magic, reimagined fairy tales, monster hunters, warring kingdoms, and racial conflicts. Now, at face value, you could see this as a pretty classic fantasy world with humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes. It's both familiar and comfortable, yet it's also much darker and realistic in tone compared to other high fantasy series. The Witcher can be remarkably bleak at times, but also very humorous. This is a morally ambiguous universe, yet Geralt of Rivia, both cynical and noble, manages to maintain his own coherent code of ethics. And this series loves to subvert tropes and expectations. This is something that permeates every aspect of the stories, from Geralt himself to the monsters who are often victims more than terrors. We'll often see the humans reveal themselves to be the true monsters. Something I really enjoyed was just how deep the politics of the world got. It made me really invested in the world of The Witcher. The next spot goes to Castle Gormenghast from the series by Mervyn Peake. Now, Gormenghast is a sprawling castle that stretches for miles. It's not necessarily a fantasy world, but to the inhabitants of the castle, it is their world. A labyrinth of cryptic rooms, dark corridors, endless stairs, and secret passages, Castle Gormenghast. There's the Hall of Bright Carvings, the Hall of Spiders, a mysterious cat room, and the Tower of Flints, the highest tower, which is inhabited by a large number of owls. The castle itself is a monster and inconceivably old, developed by 76 generations. Many of the rooms have been forgotten, and its network so intricate that a person could easily go missing and undiscovered for years. It's so large and ancient that it's gradually crumbling under the enormous weight of its own monstrous architecture. Outside the castle, you'll find a hodgepodge of mud dwellings inhabited by the Bright Carvers. There's even a sort of sci-fi steampunk location later in the series, but really the first two books are the ones that are worth reading. Unfortunately, Mervyn Peake suffered from early onset dementia, and this kinda starts to show itself in book 3, which is much more fragmented and the style changes. This is a series I find incredibly interesting, and the setting itself has actually been a huge inspiration for one of the main locations in the book that I'm currently writing. It's wonderfully strange, it's unlike anything I've ever read. However, and this is a big however, it is not for everyone, and I understand why. This series is nothing like Tolkien or most fantasy you've read. It's very slow and dense, there's not a lot of action, so I would only recommend it to a certain type of reader. It's the kind of book where you just sink into the world and the weirdness and the prose. I recommend reading the preview on Amazon, and from the first paragraph, you should be able to realize if this is your type of story or not. If you like historical fiction and literary fiction, as well as fantasy, then I think this is a perfect blend of all of those. The Realm of the Elderlings from Robin Hobb's books is incredible. It's made up of 5 different series set in the same world with 16 books in total. It's one of the most expansive and detailed worlds that I've ever come across. From the 6 duchies, to the Mountain Kingdom, to the Out Islands, to the Rain Wilds, the Realm of the Elderlings is vast, with a wide range of cultures. And since there's so many books in this series, you're gonna end up feeling super familiar with all the different aspects of this world. Now, Robin Hobb is incredible at painting a vivid picture of the environment and different settings. You can feel the warmth of the palace and the crispness of the mountains in her description. And along with building an immense world with a captivating plot, Hobb has also created some amazing characters who are the heart and soul of this world. The 5 different series contained within this epic fantasy saga travel all over the realm, switching perspectives among a variety of characters, but it always comes back to Fitz Chivalry Farseer, the royal bastard turned assassin in training, and of course his strange and seemingly destined relationship to the Fool. If you like character-driven stories where the characters are fantastically flawed and enjoy a really good slow burn, then the Realm of the Elderlings is for you. It's got intricate politics and character relationships that feel real, along with action, intrigue, and wonder. This is not your typical fantasy, and you definitely won't see any Mary Sue characters here. Characters go through a lot of hardships, not just our main character Fitz, but everyone, and again, they're all flawed. Also, bonus points, because it's a completed saga. I still need to get to some of the series within Realm of the Elderlings myself, but the fact that it's completed definitely encourages me to read on so I can see how it concludes. Next, we need to address the elephant in the room. I'm talking about Discworld. Now, many fantasy authors map their magical lands onto something that is similar to an Earth-like planet, but Sir Terry Pratchett's imagination went above and beyond. Discworld, as you would assume, is a disc-shaped world, carried on the backs of 4 elephants that in turn stand upon the shell of an ancient space turtle moving slowly through the cosmos. This world is roughly the size of our Pacific Ocean, and it hosts a myriad of continents and nations and cities like the iconic Ankh-Morpork. This is probably my favorite fictional city ever. A city with 1 million inhabitants, no sewers, and it has legalized crime and a thieves guild and everything. Everything from its city watch and the unseen university are described with such vivid imagery, and Ankh-Morpork is a constant in the Discworld books. It's almost a main character in itself. This huge series doesn't really follow the journey of one character or group, they diversify. While sometimes you'll have the same cast from the previous book, other times you'll have a completely new cast, which means new opportunities to experience Ankh-Morpork, but also other parts of this zany world from new perspectives. Over the course of 40-odd novels, readers get the chance to discover every nook and cranny of Pratchett's comical fantasy world. And it is truly one of the very best in fantasy ever created. Seriously, if you haven't read a single Discworld book, you're really missing out. Next is the known world, specifically Westeros, from the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. How could I not include this on the list? What I love about Westeros is how different all the cities and regions seem from each other. They each have such a distinct culture, climate, architecture, and just overall they feel different from the next. And one thing specifically that I noticed is that Martin really thought about names in detail, and he used them as a way to show regional differences, so you had an idea of where characters were from based on their names. I would also say A Song of Ice and Fire is S tier when it comes to how it handles mystery. This is a world that feels old and well lived in, yet it holds many, many mysteries. Ancient ruins, cities built over cities, old relics, catacombs, anything that basically says there are thousands of years of history in this setting is what I love to see in fantasy books. Martin was clearly inspired by British medieval history when creating his fantasy world. Not only is the story similar to real-world events, such as the Wars of the Roses, but the shape of Westeros itself is also vaguely reminiscent of the United Kingdom. One thing I loved about the opening credits of Game of Thrones, it takes us across the world to every key location, letting us know the scope of the known world. And then with each season, the opening credits would evolve, displaying visuals of new places depending on what happens in each episode. With several richly imagined continents with deep history and lore, and not to mention mystery, and hundreds of characters, the known world is truly one of the best fantasy settings out there. Now, it was very difficult narrowing it down to 10 worlds for this list, so I'm kind of cheating with this next one and mentioning several worlds in one, with the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. This is the connected universe of many of his adult fantasy books. Specifically, I'm going to mention the ash-covered world of Scadrial from the Mistborn books, and the storm-ravaged planet of Roshar from the Stormlight Archive. These two are my favorites in the Cosmere, and are a testament to Sanderson being a world-building creative genius. On Scadrial, the books take place during a time when the Dark Lord has already won. The immortal Lord Ruler has separated society into two tiers, the nobles and the Ska. Of course, the winner is the one who writes the history books, and much of the history of Scadrial is a mystery. In fact, there's a lot of mystery to this world that slowly gets uncovered. Now, a planet covered in ash where the sun is red and mysterious mist appears at night is an incredible setting for a fantasy story, and the metal-based magic system called Allomancy is one of my all-time favorites of any series ever. To explain this quickly, basically users can ingest and burn metals for various effects, and those who have the ability to burn all of them are Mistborn. And I really enjoyed seeing a lot of great combinations and new discoveries of how the magic can be used. Now, Roshar is incredible as well, a planet that has a huge storm that cycles around every few weeks. A storm so powerful that it blasts away all soil, leaving only stone and creme behind. And Roshar itself has basically evolved to survive this storm. Plants pull down into the ground, lay flat, or retract into boulders when the high storm hits. Animals on the planet are mostly crab-like creatures that have shells to protect them, and some of these crustacean-like creatures can grow to the size of islands that some people call home. At number 2, we have The Unnamed World from the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Often fans refer to this world as Randland, named after one of the protagonists, Rand al'Thor. Robert Jordan introduces us to this unnamed land from the relatively narrow viewpoint of this character, a farmer's son from the backwater area of the Two Rivers, and the reader's world expands alongside Rand's over the course of the 14 books, plus one prequel. This is by far one of my favorite worlds to spend time in. The reason this is one of my favorites of all time is because it's full of various nations, each with a rich and distinct history, and Randland feels authentic because it's inspired by real cultures around the globe. It's heavily inspired by real history and mythology. It draws on elements from Norse, Celtic, and Asian legends, and Jordan is absolutely fantastic at creating different cultures, which for me goes a long way towards good world building. Now, this realm is complete with deep and fully realized civilizations and races, such as the desert-dwelling Aiel, the monstrous Trollocs, the nature-loving giants called the Ogier, and the terrifying Myrddraal, and many more. The history of the Aiel in particular is something I really enjoy. You probably know this series is well known for its detailed world, magic system, and its large cast of characters. And honestly, I would say in a lot of ways it rivals Middle-earth. Jordan may not have made up such intricate fictional languages as Tolkien did, but the Old Tongue is still really interesting. I also really love all the figures of speech that the characters use that often reflects their culture or their background. And it's also incredibly impressive that Robert Jordan invented more than 3,000 years of exceedingly detailed history and an impressive system of metaphysics. The magic system at play here, with Aes Sedai being able to tap into the one power, basically the driving force of creation, the force that the creator made to turn the Wheel of Time itself. This is one of my favorite magic systems of all time. The way it's now been tainted and causes male channelers to go insane is the main aspect that initially hooked me with this series, and then the incredible world building sealed the deal on making me love these books. From the White Tower to the Aiel Waste to the lands across the Aerith Ocean, there is so much depth here, which is why it's so high up on my list. And at number 1, still holding the crown, is Middle-earth. Tolkien's Middle-earth is so fleshed out and incredible that even after it's been copied in so many ways and forms throughout the whole fantasy genre, it's still more intricate than almost any other setting out there. It has extremely well-developed mythology, multiple languages, and deep history. Tolkien's world has 32,000 years that are recorded in the Silmarillion. It has deep, expansive, and epic lore, and it still holds the throne of the most elaborate worlds ever created. Sure, you can comment, it's very cliche for me to put this at the number 1 spot, but if you're a Tolkien fan, you know that it deserves that spot. What he did has yet to be replicated. Well, it has actually been replicated a lot, actually, but not nearly as well. It was his life's work, and it truly shows. Now, many people just think of Middle-earth as Lord of the Rings, but adding in the Silmarillion and the Hobbit and everything else, the sheer amount of depth to Middle-earth is more than many authors could ever hope to achieve. And now for some honorable mentions. The Forgotten Realms, originally created by Ed Greenwood for D&D, but has since seen numerous authors contribute to this realm. R.A. Salvatore's The Legend of Drizzt was one of those series that really got me into reading. And while it can be a little bit generic, it is still an incredible fantasy setting. The Stillness from N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy nearly made it onto my top 10. This is a supercontinent where every couple hundred years, catastrophe happens. The weather changes, volcanoes erupt, and earthquakes shake the land. The sky is full of these mysterious floating obelisks that are remnants of some long-lost civilization. And there's these stone eaters, these living statues who move through the earth like water. Not to mention, there's also humans that are born on this world that have the ability to generate earthquakes and control the movement of the earth. The Stillness is an incredibly unique fantasy world. I also want to give a shout out to The First Law world by Joe Abercrombie. While I do find this to be a fascinating world, and this is one of my favorite series of all time, the world here is not the main focus, it's the characters. Their inner battles with their own demons. That's the main focus of The First Law. The world of Krynn from the Dragonlance books definitely deserves a mention. It is a classic fantasy, there's a lot of familiar stuff here, but there's also just a lot going on. And considering there's a ton of books written by a ton of different authors, you really get to see these characters grow and you become invested, and in some cases you even end up following their children afterwards. Dragonlance deserves the mention. The Earthsea Cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin is another one that almost made the list because of its incredible world. The Earthsea books take place in an archipelago made up of hundreds of islands with various cities and settlements on them that all feel very diverse. Le Guin's dragons basically set the gold standard for dragons in fantasy. This is a series also where cultures interact in a really meaningful way. The world building is so lush and deep, and the narrative voice is really compelling. It feels like you're actually learning about a people who really lived 1,000 years ago in an age of magic and wonder that's long past and is never gonna come again. The Old Kingdom from Garth Nix series, starting with Sabriel. This was almost gonna be on the list because this is one of my favorite fantasy worlds, especially for a young adult series. We have this sort of modern magicless world with technology, and then there's a huge wall that divides it from the Old Kingdom, which, like I said in my last video, is like if you went to Narnia and discovered that it's been taken over by the undead for hundreds of years. The vivid descriptions of nature, the borderland between these two kingdoms, and the 7 bells of magic are something I always find really fascinating. And this series just doesn't get mentioned enough. The world of Malazan from Malazan Books of the Fallen. I just haven't read enough of this series yet. I read like half of the first book years ago, and I just haven't continued yet, but I do plan on reading through these books. But from what I've read, this is a very dense and vast world. Now, Steven Erikson is an archaeologist, and I believe an anthropologist, and this really shows. This is a world with layers and layers of history. Obviously, this does deserve to be one of the top 10 fantasy worlds, but I can't put it on my list because I just haven't read enough of it. You can expect to see it on an updated list in a future video. The world of Temerant, also known as the Four Corners of Civilization from the Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. You might be surprised this is only getting an honorable mention from me when this is one of my favorite series. From the vast archives at the heart of the university, to the hardened land of the Adem, to the realm of the Fae, this is a very fascinating world with a lot of interesting lore, and just the way that history kind of mirrors itself and repeats itself is something I find interesting. Now, obviously, I'm probably forgetting a lot of incredible worlds. Maybe I just haven't read them, so let me know in the comments your favorites. Those were my top 10 fantasy worlds of all time. This video was a lot to put together, from the writing to the filming to the voice lines and the editing. It took a lot of work putting this video together. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment if you did enjoy it. That would mean a lot. Also, I'm streaming on Twitch now. If you want to follow me over there and hang out and watch me play some games, then you can do so. What rolled the can, guys? What rolled the can? Seriously, somebody is extremely messy. Where do I go? Where do I go? Where do I go? I wasn't reloaded! Are you kidding me?
I'm going to be starting a brand new playthrough of Breath of the Wild really soon. I'm also playing Persona 5. I'm going to start Elden Ring soon and Spider-Man Remastered. Also, if you want to help support the channel even more, then consider joining my Patreon. You don't know how much that helps out the channel, and I just appreciate it so much. Anyway, let me know in the comments your top 10 fantasy worlds, and I'll see you next time.